Thank you so much. My name's Sam DeCanio. I'm a reader in the Department of Political Economy here at King's College London. And we're very happy that everybody showed up and came here from all over the world to participate in the first of what we hope will become an annual PPE conference, which will be held here at King's. The original idea for the conference was actually came from one of my former colleagues, Billy Christmas. And our idea was that the Department of Political Economy was uniquely positioned to offer a PPE conference, given how interdisciplinary the department is. It's the only political economy department in the UK that has economists, political theorists, and political scientists working side by side. And it offers a number of excellent degree programs. Our PPE undergraduate degree is one of our most popular, and it seems to be growing every single year. And so we thought that it would be a wonderful idea to offer a conference, and we were lucky enough to partner with Jeff Sayer-McCord from the PPE Society. And I just wanted to sort of hand things off to Jeff. He's going to introduce our keynote speaker today. He's going to say a little bit about the PPE Society as well. Really quickly, two things. After the keynote, we're going to have a drinks reception, which will be in the arcade just immediately outside of the lecture hall. And after Moses is done giving his lecture, we're going to have microphones that are going to be passed around to record questions that people have, so we can include this in the video that we're recording for the event. So thanks so much for showing up. And Jeff, if you want to come up and just say a few words.
So can you hear me fine? Okay, good. I want to start by expressing deep gratitude to Sam for organizing this conference. It's a hugely complicated thing to do. There are 385 people registered for the conference. There's session after session and concurrent sessions. It's really a masterful job you pulled off, and today is the proof. So I'm looking forward to tomorrow. Thank you so much. I also want to thank the student volunteers who worked very hard to take more or less wayward academics and point them in the right direction. So please, if you run into them, if you've benefited from them, even if you haven't, but you know someone who has, please thank them so much for the time and energy they put into helping people move from room to room, to get from the entrance to the two different buildings. Thank you to all of you. Can you raise your hands just back there? Okay, good job. I also owe serious and genuinely unlimited gratitude to Corey Hensel and Rebecca Pugh. They work with me at the PPE Society. They are the back end of everything. And without them, the PPE Society just would be doing nothing at all. Instead, what we do is an annual conference in New Orleans every November. And we have 400 to 500 people at it, and it's exactly the same model. And I'm going to say something about the model in a minute. But before I speak about the model, I want to convey our sense, the PPE Society's sense, of what PPE can be and what we're working to try to make it be effectively. As we see it, the three namesake disciplines, and it's not exclusive to them, but it's easy to convey the idea with the three namesakes. The three namesake disciplines are really indispensable to our understanding one and the same subject: social and political institutions, both formal ones and informal institutions. As we see it, without economics and political science and philosophy, we would be missing crucial things about the world in which we live. So, for instance, and I won't spend too much time on this. Economics reveals opportunities for mutual advantage, for Pareto improvements, for efficient mechanisms for making things happen. In the context of markets, what's possible is so much more in many cases than would be available otherwise. Political science, the thing about, well, political scientists focus on institutions in particular, including institutions that shape the opportunities that markets and other economic institutions work within. They study the institutions, they think about it, their history, their point, their structure, their constitutions if they have it. And philosophers think carefully about, in particular, justice and rights and value and respect, and how those can and should shape and play into and help to be realized by institutions. Each of these disciplines shines a bright light, a searchlight, that reveals details, niches, aspects of social and political institutions that are crucial. But like each searchlight, alone they cast long shadows. So economists tend to proudly eschew talk of values or rights or justice. And often they take as given the institutions within which they're doing their various economic analyses. Political scientists often assume institutions will work as designed and are often surprised by the perverse incentives that they create and are often not keen to emphasize, say, market solutions to problems that they are imagining will be solved by an institution that might be established. And philosophers actually talk ad nauseum about justice and values and rights, but very generally ignore real-world constraints. Don't think a lot about the costs involved in pursuing the ideas they celebrate. So the idea of the PPE Society is if in various ways, in various combinations, with various significant differences, people with interests in these three areas, if they come together, will get a better understanding of the world. So that's the idea of the PPE Society. The conferences we hold, we're holding our 9th conference in New Orleans this November, are designed to be intellectual tasting menus. So we have a series of sessions. They each are meant to have 3 speakers. We try to aim to have each session be a mix of disciplines or perspectives or insights. And we expect people to feel comfortable enough to step into a session just because they don't really know what it would be about, and to try it out and to see if there's something interesting there, knowing that the session isn't long, and even that if it's not paying off at all, they can step out of one and into another. We also, and this is a real plus here at King's, are keen for people to feel comfortable when they meet somebody new who they find interesting, saying, let's go get a coffee, let's hang out in the quad, let's talk a bit. Knowing that because there are concurrent sessions, there's not a session where people are going to be sitting there saying, why aren't you there? I was wondering, no. So that's how this conference was set up. So far, my experience talking to people who've been in sessions is it's realizing its hopes in many ways. People are meeting other people they didn't know. They're getting to display their ideas and get useful feedback. Thank you to all who make it possible. It's all of you. Finally, the real point of me standing up here is to introduce our keynote speaker. So I'm really pleased and delighted that Moses Shayo agreed to be the keynote speaker here. He's a professor of economics at Hebrew University and a professor in the Department of Political Economy here at King's College London. Moses relies, and this is sort of emblematic or an exemplar of how we're thinking about PPE, Moses relies on a combination of theoretical, econometric, and experimental tools to understand the impact of, for instance, identity on voting, income redistribution, nationalism, ethnic conflict, consumption choices, international integration, and judicial decisions. He also studies how, for instance, financial markets shape values and preferences, and, for instance, the gender gap. Tonight, Moses will be speaking about paying not to know. News avoidance in times of war. Please join me in welcoming our keynote speaker.
Thank you so much. And thanks for inviting me and for the wonderful introduction. And it's actually been a very interesting day, I think, for me. And the fact that we can skip between sessions and hear about things that, at least for me, I don't always hear about. So that was great. I'm going to discuss joint work with Roy Levy from Tel Aviv University and Guy Anai, who is a PhD student at Hebrew U. And it's going to be somewhat depressing, but I promised Sean there's also going to be a glimmer of hope towards the end. So this is going to be about conflict. So this is the ongoing conflict in Gaza. And this is a survey we ran about 6 months into the conflict. In Israel and in Jordan. It was very hard to run a survey within Gaza, but there are many Palestinians living in Jordan. So it was interesting for us to look at the two sides. A proxy of one of the sides is the Palestinians in Jordan, and the other one is the Israeli side. Now, what we know from the economic analysis of conflict, of war, is that one of the main contributors to conflict is asymmetric information. The two sides do not agree on the facts, on various assessments on the state of the world. But that is generally seen as a reason for the onset of conflict, not so much for the persistence, because after a conflict starts, the two sides learn. I mean, whatever they disagreed on, now there's a lot of evidence. So this is 6 months into the conflict, asking very basic facts. So this is, I'll tell you later a bit more about the study, but this is in a control group, so they didn't receive any treatment for us. So we can treat this as a representative sample. I should say, actually, in Israel, this is representative sample. In Jordan, this is relatively more educated people than the mean. But still, here are a couple of statements. So this is a statement of fact that Israeli women and children were kidnapped by Hamas in October 2023. In Israel, everybody thinks this is correct, almost everybody, 95%. In Jordan, it's about 50%. This question, unarmed Israelis were attacked by Hamas. Again, in Israel, 95% think it's true. In Jordan, it's only 10% that think this is true. Let's switch sides. Thousands of Gazan children died, or were killed, actually, is the right translation, in Israeli strikes. In Jordan, basically everybody thinks this is correct. In Israel, only 30% think this is correct. I should say we reran the study just now, last month. The numbers are slightly higher in Israel, but it's still less than 50%. Okay? The majority of those killed by Israeli strikes were civilians. Again, in Jordan, everybody believes this. In Israel, it's about 10% who think this is true. So amazing differences in beliefs, or in stated beliefs at least. We look at also whether this is actual belief. 6 months into the conflict, and even a year after the conflict. And so what explains this? Okay. And what this paper looks at is how much of this is basically driven by individuals' demand for information. Basically, individuals don't want to know certain things. And one way to look at this is to look at what the media reports. So this is, for example, one example. I have many examples here. Take any specific minute in the first year of the war, which is what we actually did. And at a specific minute, look at the website. This is Al Jazeera in Arabic, and this is Ynet in Hebrew. This is the most popular website in Israel, probably the most popular in the Arab world. At the exact same minute, they both report about the war, but they report a completely different situation. So in Israel, this is a story about, soldiers being killed. Another one about a civilian, in this case, an Arab Israeli civilian who got killed by a rocket. And in Al Jazeera, at the same minute, you open the website, and it's about, again, the war in Gaza, but this is about Palestinian victims massacred by the Israeli occupation. And the first year of the conflict, any minute that you open, I'll show you just one more, it looks like that. There are two, right? This is 1638, August 19th. And they report completely different worlds, basically. So what we want to ask is whether these differences, to what extent they might be driven by demand. So not just supply, by demand. Maybe these news organizations respond to what people want to see. And specifically, do individuals seek to avoid news about outgroup victims? And to make it even sharper, since I am an economist, would they forego monetary payoffs? Would they pay, and how much would they pay in order to avoid reading such news? And to the extent that this is true, that people don't want to read certain news, we want to understand what are the factors, right? Is this economic, instrumental mechanisms that drive this? Is this universalistic, affective factors? Or is this about social identity? And I'll talk more about social identity later. That's question number one. Question number two is what would happen if people did read the news that they do not normally read? Okay, what would happen if we took Palestinians and we let them read about Israeli victims? If we took Israelis and we let them read about Palestinian civilian victims? How would this affect their beliefs, their attitudes, and their empathy towards the other side? And second, what are the effects, not just on people on average, but on those people who are particularly averse to reading such news? So people who who normally do not want to read such news, right? These would be the people who would pay a lot not to read about the outgroup. So you could say, if we expose these people, maybe these people they're not going to respond. There's a reason they're not reading this news, and we expose them to this. This will not change their mind. There may even be a backlash, right? Why are you exposing me to this? I might become even more extreme. I'll go through the research design roughly, how we measure all these things, and then go through the results. Willingness to pay. This abbreviation will come up again and again. Willingness to pay for in-group versus out-group articles, the mechanisms, the effects of reading about out-group victims, and finally, does the effect of news depend on whether people actually want to hear it? Okay? So this is how we did it. So basically, we recruit. So this is spring of 2004. We recruit 1,750 Israelis and about 200 Jordanians. I should say we aimed at recruiting many more Jordanians, but because you'll see in a minute, there's a complicated part within the survey that required us to make sure people understand the mechanism. And in Israel, this was fine, but in Jordan, this caused us to lose a big chunk of the original survey. So I should There's a caveat here. The Jordanian sample is not a representative sample. It's the relatively more higher income and more educated people. In Israel, it's a representative sample. And then these people get certain instructions. Basically, we try to elicit how much they're willing to pay in order to read 18 articles. These are going to be the same articles that both the Israelis and the Palestinians see. I'll show you some examples in a minute. And they're going to say how much they're willing to pay or to give up with respect to those articles. Then we collect some attitudes, and then we actually randomize whether they do get to read or they do not get to read the article, and they are incentivized to read them. Okay, so if they do get to read them, most of them, we'll see, most of them actually do read them. And then we can check, normally the people who read these articles and the people who do not are clearly not the same people, right? They have different views, etc. But here, because this is random, we can compare and we can see what the effect of reading these articles is. And we look at what happens when you read an article about in-group victims, an article about out-group victims, and other victims. This is mostly Ukrainian conflict victims, but also victims of natural disasters. And then we can see, by comparing these guys and these guys, what is the effect of reading about the outgroup. Okay. And we do a follow-up survey a week later to see how much of this, the effects persist. Okay. So how do we elicit willingness to pay or willingness to forgo money in order not to read? So these are the instructions. We tell them you will be presented with 19 headlines of CNN articles. Actually, only 18 are going to be ones that we use. And one of these articles was randomly drawn for each participant, but you don't know which one. And you will be asked 3 questions on the article that was drawn for you. If you answer 2 questions, 2 out of the 3, if you answer 2 correctly, then you win 90 points. These are people who participate in surveys. This is not the only survey they do. They participate in surveys and they get rewarded by points. So 90 points is equivalent. So usually this is, they're paid according to how long the survey is on average. So 90 points is about 35 minutes of survey. About £2 in monetary terms. We tell them the questions are not difficult. 95% of those who read the article won the prize. This is true based on a pilot study. But you need to know the details. If you just know the general story, you will not be able to get the prize, and only 20% of those who did not read the article won. And you will only have 60 seconds to answer the quiz, so basically you cannot Google the answer, Google the questions when you need to answer it. Now, this is where it gets a little bit tricky. I'm not going to go into the details. Those who know, this is a variation of the BDM mechanisms. There's a price that was already drawn for each article between 0 and 100. You need to tell us what is your maximum willingness to pay for this article. If the number you gave us, this WTP number, is greater than the price that was already drawn, then you will pay that price, not your willingness to pay. You will pay that price, and you will read the article, and you will probably receive these 90 points. If it's below this price, then you do not pay anything, and you do not read the article, and you probably will not receive the prize. And we tell them specifically there are no strategic considerations, so this is true, there are no strategic considerations that can improve their chances of winning the prize. It is always best to mark the maximum you're actually willing to pay, and there are detailed examples, and they must pass extensive comprehension checks, and that's where we lost, as I told you before, some people in Jordan. These are the headlines they need to see. So we choose headlines from a third-party source. So these are all going to be from the CNN. And it's going to be articles about civilian victims, Gazans, Israelis, Ukrainians, and victims of natural disasters. As it turned out, there was no difference between the Ukrainians and the other disasters. The big differences are between in-group and out-group articles and the rest. And we include articles about recent events, which presumably may be more relevant, and older events from the 2010s. And these are not opinion pieces. These are pieces about civilian victims that focus on the situation on the ground. And we elicit the willingness to pay for 18 articles out of 43 potential articles. So everybody gets, say, 5 articles on Gaza, 5 articles on Israel, 5 articles on Ukraine. But these are different articles. Okay? So this allows us, you'll see later, to see what is it about the article about Israel or about Gaza that makes people pay more or less for that article. Okay, so we'll have variation in article characteristics. For example, okay, so this is so people see this headline taken from CNN. What we do is we add the translation. So this is the Hebrew version of the survey, but this is the original text and picture from CNN, a heartbreaking story. I kissed her, but she wouldn't wake up. Grandfather grieves for 3-year-old granddaughter killed as she slept in Gaza. And then they have to say what is the maximum price they'll be willing to pay. And there's a reminder again, if you answer correctly, you get 90 points. Okay? And now there's another example. This is about Israeli victims. Again, this is taken from the CNN as it is, and we add the translation, etc. Many articles. Some of them are from the recent conflict, 2023, and some of them from the previous decade. Okay, and we also include Ukrainian victims. To see how much of this is driven just by the fact that maybe people don't want to read about conflict, about war, and natural disasters. This is an attention check. I'll skip this just to make sure people are paying attention. The way this is structured is to simulate in some way what people do when they get their news feed on social media. So we take this from social media. Add the translation, but other than that, we take this from social media. And then when people scroll through their feed and they need to basically decide, are they going to invest time in this article? Are they going to click or not? Okay, so here they're going to tell us, I want to read, I don't want to read this article. So what do we get out of this? We fix, as much as we can, the monetary value. If you want the instrumental value, the material instrumental value from reading or not reading. And the reward, because if you read the article and actually understand it, you are getting 90 points reward. If you're paying us less than that, that can help us, allow us to infer how much you're giving up in order not to read the article. Okay? And you get the prize only if you pass the quiz. So these are the values of actually reading, not just being exposed, but you actually have to read the news. We fix the source. So there are studies saying, well, people prefer Fox News or people prefer MSNBC. We fix the source. So the only difference, and we fix the monetary value. So the only difference really is the contents of the articles. And importantly, the same article, say the article about the victims in Gaza, the same article is about in-group victims for Jordanians, but is about out-group victims for Israelis. So we can hold constant all the characteristics of the article, whether the picture is particularly repulsive or attractive, whether there's something about the wording. We keep the article fixed, but within that same article, for some people it is an out-group, and for some people it is an in-group victim that the article describes. So let's look at the results. So remember, people need to say a number between 0 and 100, how much they're willing to pay for this article. If they read it, they will probably get a prize of 90 points. So those who pay more than 90 points, say they want to pay more than 90 points, these are people who are actually paying money, so they will pay us, the survey company, a little bit of money for reading the articles. Those who give a number less than 90, well, they stand a chance to lose. Now, if they're homo economicus and they do exactly the calculation, so the expected value, because you go from 20% to 95% chance, then this is 67.5. I don't expect people to do this calculation, but this gives us a benchmark, okay, of how much a homo economicus risk-neutral person would pay. But the point for us would be to compare what happens across articles. Okay. And these are the results. So for in-group victims, so this is Israel and Jordan all together. The in-group victims, a substantial part of people are actually paying a positive amount. But there's a distribution, right, around 50. So it's, people may not want to read the article because it takes time or it takes attention or it's costly for various reasons. The big difference is when you compare in-group victim to neutral group victim, these are the Ukrainians and natural disaster, and out-group victim. When we look at out-group victim, there's a significant chunk of people who are saying 0. So these are people who for sure say, I'm giving up the prize. Even though this is worth more than how much I get for the entire survey, I'm giving up that prize. I don't want to read this article, okay? So we can start by looking at these zeros, right? These are people who we say are paying not to know. And we can check whether you pay 0, you say I don't want to know, as a function of whether the article you were assigned, so I'm comparing a given individual, within an individual, he has 18 articles to choose from, to rate. So within that individual, do they pay more or less on average for articles with in-group victims or without group victims? And we see a big gap. So people are paying, are more likely to say 0 when it's an out-group victim versus an in-group victim. This is in Jordan, much smaller sample. But again, we get this gap, more likely when it's an out-group victim. This is when we put both of them together, we get a, so this is basically controlling for all the characteristics of the article and just comparing people for whom this article is in-group or out-group. And it's about 5 percentage points more likely to say 0 if it's an out-group victim article. And now we can do this using the continuous measure of willingness to pay. So this is throwing away a lot of information. This is using the entire, the actual answer. And we find between 13 and 20 points gap in willingness to pay between in-group victims and out-group victims. Okay. So now we want to understand why this happens. Okay, why this happens. Why people are unwilling to read about the out-group and are willing to read about the in-group. And as an economist, you always start with a standard economic explanation, which is, well, maybe there are instrumental considerations involved. Instrumental like monetary or other, although we keep the monetary price fixed, but there may be other instrumental considerations for this. For example, maybe I'm paying more for in-group articles because they provide more relevant information, or maybe more recent information, or maybe I'm less familiar with the article. Or maybe people think that there's a higher chance to win the prize if this is an in-group article. Okay, so we're going to test these various mechanisms. Second possibility is, well, people don't want to read sad things. So I just don't want to read things that will make me sad. And the third one is about social identity. So two parts to social. So I've been studying social identity quite a lot, and basically within social identity, people usually, economists at least, discuss two aspects of social identity. One is that you want to think good things about your group. You want your group to do well. You want your group to have high status. So people may seek to avoid information that makes the group look bad, or that contradicts, if this is about cognitive dissonance, that contradicts their attachment to the group. There's also hints, we'll see later, that people are what we call strategic desensitizers. So I don't want to read the news that will will make me too sensitive to the other side, and thereby harm my resolve to fight. The second part of social identity is people who identify with a certain group follow the norms of that group. And here, there may be a strong norm that it is important for example, Israelis or for Arabs to read certain news. It's as if I have a duty to read about the suffering of people from my group. How do we assess these things? Well, we use heterogeneity across individuals. Some people identify strongly with their group, some people identify less. So we want to see whether this is about identification, related to identification, recency of the article, and characteristics of the articles. And then we also ask the participants to just tell us. Well, we tell them, well, you paid this much for this article, you didn't pay a lot for that article, tell us why. This is how we code article characteristics. So we have similar people from the same sample, rate the same articles, but these are not the people who made the decisions. And they rate they see the same headlines, and they rate each one on various characteristics. Does the article portray both Israelis and Palestinians positively or negatively? Will the article evoke negative emotions? Are you familiar with the details of the incident? So it's about familiarity. How reliable you think this article is going to be? And this norm, it is important that Israelis or Arabs read this. And then we repeat this a year later, adding probing a bit deeper into the emotions and the commitment to fight. I'll just summarize the results. There's a longer section in the paper on this, but this is what we find basically. So instrumental considerations cannot explain the gap in willingness to pay. Basically, almost none of the effect can be explained by that. Moreover, if anything, the effects go in the opposite direction. So it turns out people actually pay more for articles that are familiar or are judged by similar others to be about familiar topics. The gap persists even within old articles, which are maybe less relevant. And people, in fact, pay more for articles that are expected to have smaller effects on their monetary pair. So people recognize that reading an article about the outgroup increases their chances of winning the prize more than reading about the in-group. So they are more familiar. But still, you know, their willingness is not about that. It's not about the prize. This was a bit surprising for us. If anything, people are paying more for articles that are, so holding fixed whether this is an in-group or out-group article, people are willing to pay more for articles that are expected to make them sad. So when we look to induce negative emotions, and specifically when we look at which emotions, it's mostly sadness and anxiety, also some indication about shame. And people do in fact feel sadder during the survey, so we measure their emotions actually in the survey when they actually have to read articles about in-group victims. But these two things cannot explain So these two things cannot explain why people pay more for in-group and don't want to read about the out-group. What explains this is what I described before. It's strongly associated with the strength of subjective identification. So people who identify more with, say, the Palestinians. So we used various measures. They all go in the same direction, identifying with the Palestinians, identifying as Arab, identifying as Israeli with the Israelis. This is strongly correlated with the gap in willingness to pay. And the factor that explains the most, and the factor that people mention in the retrospection the most, is this norm that it is important to read this article about in-group victims. And it is important not to read about the out-group victims. Because it may increase, or those articles that are expected, so other people judge that are expected to increase empathy towards the other side, and we can resolve to fight. So far, very grim. But now let's look at what actually reading the articles does. So we told the people, and I told you, that we drew randomly an article for each individual, and then they read it and they are quizzed about it. So now they're actually exposed to different articles. So we can compare as part of this mechanism. So now we can compare people who were exposed to articles about the in-group and people who are exposed to articles about the out-group. What we did is, some people got, so they either got an Israeli victims, a Gazan victim, or a neutral victim article. And then they actually either got a price of 0. If it's a price of 0, that means you get to read the article even if you said 0, okay? So we get even the people who said 0, there's no price for the article, so you're exposed to the article. And some people, and many people got a price of 100, which means that you're almost never exposed to the article. So this allows two types of comparisons. One is we can compare, say, within people who got an Israeli victims article, those who were exposed or assigned a 0 price and those who were not exposed, and similarly here. But more interesting is we can compare people who were exposed to an Israeli victims or a Gazan victims article. So these are the texts that they see. They're pretty long and heartbreaking, really are heartbreaking, all of them. So this is teenage siblings freed from Hamas captivity, only to learn that their mother had been murdered on October 7. This is the article I showed you before with the grandfather grieving for his granddaughter. And this is in China, deadly earthquake. First thing we check is whether this treatment works. So we just check the share of the correct quiz answers. And as expected, people who are assigned to read a particular article are much more likely to get the questions correct. So people really did read the article. And the effect is pretty similar. It's only slightly stronger among in-group articles. So it's interesting, when people were assigned out-group articles, they did read them just as much as they read the in-group articles when they were assigned out-group articles. And we can also measure how much time they spent reading the articles, and the time is similar. So once I'm given the article, and I have this incentive to read it and answer the questions, people do read. Now here are the more interesting outcomes. The first one is empathy. So one is just a survey question. I feel sorry for the suffering of some out-group civilians hurt in the war. And you have to say how much you agree with this statement. Again, in Israel, this is about some Gazan civilians, and in Jordan, this is about some Israeli civilians. But then a second question is how much they're willing to contribute money to a charity working with the out-group. Let me show you that. So, and then we also ask about policy positions and agreement on facts. These are the same facts I started out with, but now after reading the articles. So this is about contributions. So we show them two NGOs. Both of these NGOs work both in Israel and in the Palestine and in Gaza. And then, so we describe the NGO, what it does, and then we say this NGO is active in this case, Uganda, Mexico, Israel, and other countries. And for this one, we say this NGO is active in the Philippines, Gaza, Israel, and other countries. Both of these statements are true, and both of these NGOs are active both in Gaza and in Israel. So the only difference we make is sometimes we say Project Hope. We mention that Project Hope works in Gaza, and sometimes we say that Direct Relief works in Gaza. Okay, so this is about, so the only difference between these two is going to be not how they are described and their logo and anything else, except for the fact that in this example, Direct Relief is active in Gaza. Helps the, in the case of Israel, this is in Hebrew, helps the outgroup. Okay. And would you like to donate 10 points to this one, that one, or neither? I'll skip this. So these are basically the results in Israel and in Jordan. In Jordan, we have a very small sample. So this is, it was okay for the first part because each individual made 18 decisions, but now we're only comparing across individuals, so we cannot see much in Jordan. But in Israel, there are pretty striking effects, at least surprising for me. When we did this, I didn't think there would be any effect. But this is the effect of reading about the outgroup, okay, relative to the effect of reading about the in-group. Being assigned randomly to read an article about Gazan children being killed in the war. And we have significant effects for stated empathy and for donations. This policy question, whether the army should consider the suffering of outgroup civilians during combat. And somewhat better understanding of the facts, not so much. So we had 4 facts, so we have an improvement into 1 in Jordan and 1 in Israel, moving towards the what we think is the correct answer, but not in all of them. Final question is, well, whether the effect depends on whether and how much people actually want to hear the news. So again, you could think that this would actually backlash or would not affect people. So we had a paper today discussing about whether people update their beliefs and agreeing to disagree and that stuff. So maybe these people, you know, they don't want to be exposed and therefore they would not update. And maybe they know that they will not update and therefore they don't want to be exposed. But in practice, so we basically check whether there's a difference between the people who are willing to pay to read about the outgroup and people who are not willing to pay to read about the outgroups. And basically, I won't go into this, but basically we find no differences. Okay, so the effects are the same, whether you want to read the articles or not. So if you do expose people, even those who don't want to read the articles, you do expose them to articles and you make them read. It's important that here they have an incentive to actually read it. This has an effect on empathy, on donations, well, two measures of empathy, and on policy outlooks. So to conclude, what we find, people during conflict avoid news about out-group victims, especially compared to in-group victims. And this is largely driven not by instrumental or monetary considerations. This is about group identity and a norm that I should read certain articles and I should not read. That members of this group should read about these victims and should not read about those victims. And this has effects. So the fact that people don't read these articles does affect their empathy towards the other side and their knowledge of the facts. Which means that demand for news about in-group and no out-group victims may explain that coverage gap that we started out with, and that this matters for attitudes and potentially helps perpetuate the conflict, because people still don't know what's going on in the other side, and therefore they continue to support the conflict. So I'll stop here.
Yeah, thank you so much for this fascinating talk. I was wondering whether people are engaging in a practice of self-deception here, or whether they are following a norm of not reading articles from the outgroup. Because these seem to be two quite different mechanisms. So are they basically trying to manipulate themselves, or are they just trying to avoid something that they've been told to avoid? It seems that the learning effect that you find suggests that it's partly about self-deception, but maybe it's not enough to really come to a conclusion about that.
So we looked at that. So basically, the first thing I should say is both of these mechanisms that you mentioned are not about me, but about my group. Now you're saying, now I could try to deceive myself about my group, or I could try to follow my group's norms. And we find evidence for both. So both these forces are active. The more important, quantitatively, the one that can actually explain most of all the gap, I can actually show you, but never mind. The one that explains actually most of the gap is the one about the norms. We are obliged, and also talking to people about this, many people actually say that. I am obliged, I know this will make me sad, but I have a duty to read about my compatriots who suffered, who were killed, who were kidnapped. The harder part is this thing that I also have. I'm not supposed to read about the outgroup. That's the one that really gets you. So I don't want to develop. Maybe I'll show you the results. I don't want to develop empathy to the other side, because that might weaken my resolve to fight the other side. Yeah. So it's not that I don't want, I perceive a norm that says that I should not read because it might hurt our resolve.
Thank you a lot for the very interesting talk. So I have a more methodological, boring question. Are you 100% sure that the BDM mechanism is incentive compatible here? Because under expected utility, that will work, of course.
I didn't expect this question in this round, yeah.
But under many possible explanations, self-deception, there are some kind of dynamic inconsistency of the individual and problems with belief updating, and this might lead the individual to report not his true willingness to pay for the information.
So we do quiz them as much as we can. To make sure that they understand that there is no, that this is incentive compatible and that there is no way to gain, at least monetarily, by reporting, by not reporting your true valuation. But I don't take this very literally, that if you're below 67.5. No, what I'm doing is I'm comparing whatever biases you have, I'm comparing, I'm basically assuming these biases are fixed for a specific individual, and I'm comparing within a specific individual that may be willing to pay a lot or may be willing to pay too little in general relative to the BDM. Within that individual, what's the difference between in-group and out-group articles?
Thank you. You find that the norms are really important to explain this, and you also say it's a demand-side story and not a supply-side story. Yet you also find the norm very quickly collapses when you expose people to information about the outgroup.
That's an interesting, I don't think we checked that. We should have checked that, if the norm collapses.
So that makes me wonder, right, where does the norm come from, and could that be a supply-side story? So could it be that because my newspaper only shows me certain kinds of stories, I assume, oh, there's a norm, you only read about your own victims, not about the others. The moment that changes, people see the norm differently and the behavior changes.
No, that's a great point. I actually have a PhD student who's working precisely on that. How do norms change? Specifically norms about in-group and out-group. But in this study, we didn't check that. We only checked, again, maybe this was my biases when designing this experiment. I didn't think we'll have an effect in the second part. I said, let's do it, okay, because we can. But I didn't really expect to move people's beliefs. So I certainly didn't even think about the possibility that it would change their perception of the norms, and actually shouldn't change their perception of the norms. In equilibrium, this could change. If everybody is exposed to the out-group, then the norms could change. But here I would be extremely surprised, but I was surprised with these results. So maybe you're right, maybe we should have asked that, but we didn't.